Good morning, friends, and welcome to Biblical Perspective for this Saturday, right in the middle of the year in July, as we look at what the Bible says about some current events. So, join me as we look at an interesting subject we're going to call lawlessness, because this is addressed prominently in Scripture. You've perhaps been with me when we talked about the identity of someone who has a great impact on the end times, who's described in Scripture as a man of lawlessness, as Jesus talked about how lawlessness would be one of the features of the end times when we get to Matthew 24. But as we look at how this cycles through society, we can see that it's played itself out many times in the past. The Bible speaks to this. First, in the book of Judges, there's an interesting verse that kind of winds up that book, which is a sad tale of Israel's forgetting about God in the subsequent generations after the deliverance from Egypt. They lost their perspective. There was no one left alive that remembered those things, and they began to do their own thing. And the last verse of the book of Judges reads, "But in those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did whatever seemed right to him." In the old King James, it said everyone did what was right in his own eyes. And so here you have anarchy. Literally, those folks who said, "We don't want any law over us. We want to do our own thing." Sound familiar? Oh, well, that's not only what's happening today, but when you have lawlessness, you can't have people in control of a society to enforce laws and to keep things held together. There has to be some kind of common good set of laws in any society that allows that group of people to function together with safety and security. When you don't have that, not only does lawlessness begin to reign, but that sets you up for the person that's going to come in and say, "I can solve all these problems. We're going to bring order back," and begins to take over, and usually then becomes the ruthless dictator that puts the heavy heel back down on the people after reminding them how terrible lawlessness really was. Now, I want to give you one example that I've seen pop up in the news a lot this week, and that's from some of the cities out west. San Francisco, in particular, is one I'm thinking of, where so many different stores, first it was CVS or Walgreens pharmacies in local neighborhoods and other places that have just had to close. Why? Because they can no longer prosecute shoplifters. If a shoplifter comes in and steals less than $950 worth of something, with the cameras rolling and everybody looking at them going out the front door, nobody's stopping them, nobody's doing anything, because if you prosecute them, it's a misdemeanor, which they'll be right back out on the street and coming to steal from you again. This time, perhaps violently, and they'll say, "Don't you turn me in." I mean, it's been a disaster to the point that even the Target stores have had to shorten their hours because the literal daylight looting is continuing to drive them into bankruptcy. So many stores are closing, many are just getting out because you can't afford to do business when people are allowed to steal all your product. And then you've got local politicians blaming the companies, blaming the corporations, saying, "Why are you leaving our neighborhoods? This is terrible," or "This is racism," or "This is something else." No, it's not. It's practical. It makes sense. What folks in their lunatic world would believe it's okay for people to go steal from folks that have a business that's trying to operate in your community? Friends, if that business can't operate without theft and without product going out the back door, they will shut their doors. Well, this is what happens when lawlessness takes over. And in the New Testament, the Apostle John kind of deals with this in an interesting way in his first epistle, 1 John chapter 3. Listen to what he says about sin, which he says is lawlessness. He said, "Everyone who commits sin practices lawlessness, and sin is lawlessness. You know that he was revealed," he's speaking of Jesus, "so that he might take away sins. And there is no sin in him. Everyone who remains in him does not sin, and everyone who sins has not seen him or known him." So we're talking about how Jesus not only forgives us, but takes away that idea of sinning. If you say you've come to Jesus, "Oh, I've been saved. I'm a Christian now," but you go out and rob from other people or you don't obey the laws, you're just a person of lawlessness, you better check out your salvation, because Jesus coming into your life uh, changes you in such a way that you now want to do what is good, not what is evil. Evil is lawlessness. And as we look at this as a pattern, how is it affecting our country now that we've turned our back on God and that we have decided to go with a lifestyle of lawlessness? Well, the Epic Times had a great article back on in the end of June where it talked about what's happening in a lot of our major cities. It said police officers leaving in droves, crime spiking. This is exactly what's happening. Folks who are supposed to keep the law aren't going to stick around if you don't allow them to enforce the law. It says that the largest police departments in the United States have seen a steady decline in officers over the past year, and half amid the CCP virus pandemic and a rash of anti police activism. The top three police departments in the country have lost thousands of officers since 2019, driven by an increase in retirements and resignations on top of recruiting woes. Reports of officers leaving in droves have been coming from other major jurisdictions as well. Meanwhile, those cities have seen a significant uptick in murders and shootings. Now, it really takes a dumb person. I don't like to call people dumb, but if you can't connect these two things logically and simply, I really don't know how to help you. Obviously, police officers threatened because they can't enforce the laws anymore, criminals being put back on the street after they've been arrested because no, we're just going to let them off. We're going to even hardened criminals, felons, people who have committed violent crimes, we're going to put them right back on the street. Wouldn't that frustrate you as a police officer? And would you be surprised if crime was on the rise during that? But yet we've got politicians today whose whole answer to this problem is to blame people like law-abiding citizens that might own guns and say that, well, we're going to either take those away from you or tax those in such a way that you can't even afford to have them. That's going to somehow help the crime situation. Really? Well, he goes on to say that as you look at these three largest police forces in the United States. One, New York City, of course. In New York City, police department is down about 1,500 officers since the beginning of 2020. The Chicago Police Department is down about 700 officers. And then the Los Angeles Police Department, these are our three largest cities, by the way, is down some 600 officers in the same amount of time. Now, what would you expect the crime situation would look like in those three cities? Well, as you might expect, it has skyrocketed to such a degree that people are saying, how do you stop this? How do you stop this? Well, you have to go back to enforcing the law. If you don't enforce the law, then why should you be surprised? Meantime, we have people protesting in the streets against police officers. I really pray for those that operate in our police departments, sheriff departments, and others, and in Homeland Security and other places, because you're being demonized by a whole group of people whose motivation, quite frankly, is the overthrow of the United States of America. It's nothing about keeping our communities safe. And the rhetoric they throw out is only preventing you from doing your job. One sign was seen in the middle of this article, one group of police protesters holding up a sign saying, "Blue lives don't exist." Really? You're supposed to look at these people that are serving your communities, putting their life on the line every day, and just say, they don't exist. We don't care if they die. And that's what's happening. Many are dying or being wounded in the course of trying to serve us and protect us from sometimes mobs who are just out to and having no accountability whatsoever for what they're doing. Mobs who are out to tell us that we don't even need the police while they're there burning down, tearing up a city, looting stores. Does this make sense to anyone? Listen to how it's been looking. Uh, as we look across our nation, they compiled some of the statistics and said some 2,800 uniformed personnel have been lost at the top of those three largest police departments in the country, and some other small ones doing the same thing. Listen to some of the circumstances going on there. Just going to touch a couple of these. One is Chicago. Chicago, before the COVID-19 pandemic, was already known as a source of violent crime and murder, and a place where it already seemed out of control. What's happening in Chicago now? We're told the Chicago Police Department has lost more than 700 officers since 2019. And in 2019, they were able to hire some. Are they trying to rehire some folks? Sure. They were able to hire some 459 officers. But in 2020, that number dropped to 157. This year, 105 have been hired as of the end of April. But meanwhile, some 646 officers actually retired or resigned last year, compared to another 592 in 2019. This year, 330 have already left as of the end of April. It's not just the old guard leaving, according to John Cantazara, the head of the local lodge of the Fraternal Order of Police, the Police Officers Union. He said, "We have young officers doing lateral transfers, leaving the departments or going somewhere else, whether it's a suburb or out of the state entirely." I'm talking about the same people that wanted to pick up the mantle and carry this police department. They're the ones that are saying they've had enough. Enough is enough. And what are they doing? They're leaving in droves. Earlier this year, the union voted no confidence in Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot, as well as the police superintendent, David Brown. He indicated that things like salary disputes, excessive workloads, and lack of respect for the force as the main areas of friction. Well, the mayor turns around and blames the union leadership for protracting contract negotiations, which of course he says that's crazy. It has nothing to do with it. It's actually the circumstances that you want these police officers to work under. Meanwhile, murders and shooting incidents went up more than 50% in 2020 and are up another 5% and 18% respectively this year as of June the 13th. Lightfoot blamed the violence on unemployment, poverty, and the fact that people can, quote, purchase military grade weapons, end quote, in neighboring Indiana. Now, what's shocking is that most of the poor and unemployed people don't engage in murders and shootings, and such incidents almost never involve military grade weapons over there in Indiana. They don't seem to have the same problem that they're having in Chicago. The fact is, listen to what the article says, the favored weapons of those inner city criminals are actually small, easily concealable handguns. So the mayor is disingenuous to try to blame this on military style weapons when most of these gangs committing the shootings that are killing and wounding people all over Chicago are small, easily obtainable weapons, not the military weapons. So what's all the idea behind we got to ban these assault weapons, ban assault style weapons, when that's not what's being used in most of the major criminal activity? Well, it's a step down procedure. If you can start banning any group of guns, of weapons for honest law abiding citizens, you can progressively go down and try to ban all of them. And by the time you do that, innocent law abiding citizens will not be able to protect themselves, while the criminals, who are not going to turn in their guns to anybody trying to take them up, those criminals are the ones that will be armed and will be able to wreak havoc on law-abiding neighborhoods. But friends, logical people don't seem to be able to understand that, or should I say illogical people, when they're running the government from a completely estranged leftist viewpoint. We know the same thing's happening in Los Angeles. Los Angeles Police Department has lost nearly 600 officers since 2019, in major part due to a government hiring freeze instituted in response to the pandemic, as well as the city's decision to cut the police budget by $150 million in response to calls from activists to defund the police. Now, what person thinks that it is smart in a town where you're having high crime rates already to let's get the police off the street, let's defund them? Oh, but we're going to put that money into areas that's going to really help our communities to grow and to prosper, and they'll not want to do crime anymore when we stroke them and put more money in their pocket. Really, is that the case? That's a failed idea that's been used over and over again that never, ever works. Now, what's happening in Los Angeles? Well, the defunding was supposed to cut staffing level to 9,757 officers by this summer. But as of June the 21st, the department is already down to 9,444. In other words, they're short of even the defunded amount of police officers necessary to take care of the city of Los Angeles. Now, the city somewhat boosted the department's budget this year, which will allow it to start some hiring as of the beginning of July. But the question is, who wants to work in a city where police are no longer respected and you continue to demonize them in front of people and release criminals back onto the streets? Well, right now, the city has recorded, uh, now listen to this, more than 1,300 people shot fatally and non-fatally in 2020, an increase of nearly 40% from the year before. This year, some 626 have been shot as of June the 12th, up almost 60% from the year earlier period. This is what's going on when lawlessness is somehow now encoded into this new movement, this new woke movement that's supposed to be helping our country find its new utopia, new place to go. Friends, it is just a sham, and the kind of sham you don't want to come to your community. Instead, we should be, as the Bible tells us to do, preaching submission to law enforcement to try to bring our communities together, to provide safe places for our families and our churches and our businesses. The only way you can do that is to enforce sensible laws. Once you throw all of that out the window, you set the stage for someone the Bible calls the man of lawlessness, someone who promotes this kind of action for what? Promotes it so that they can cause the instability that's necessary for the new government of the beast to take over. The kind of outcry that'll come from people who will say, just give us some safety and security. Please stop this madness. We'll do anything. Yes, you can. And we surrender to what's going to be this ruthless worldwide dictatorship the Bible talks about as a beast. How does it start? It starts with just what we're seeing right now all across our cities in the United States. It starts with lawlessness. Remember how it didn't work in the Old Testament, didn't work in the New Testament, won't work in the 21st century either. But it will set up the opportunity for evil to reign, even over good people. So, folks, batten down the hatches and more than anything, support your local law enforcement, pray for them, minister to them, bless them. When you get pulled over for a traffic stop, don't you dare fuss at that policeman. You say, yes, sir, yes, ma'am, pay your ticket, and let's rejoice in the places where we actually have decent law enforcement. Can law abiding officers that are trying to enforce the laws sometimes mess up? Can they sometimes abuse their power? Can they sometimes be bad? Yes, they can. And I'm not excusing any of those situations. And yes, there are times where we need to stand up and speak up when something is done wrong by law enforcement. But we can't remove the system of law from our communities if we want to stay safe and function. So, friends, set up a new ministry at your church, wherever you are. Begin to openly not only pray for your police officers and the folks that help you in public safety on every level, but support them in what they're doing and support the standards that will allow us to have those kind of safe communities. You see, as we looked at last week, even though we're in a nation that may be under the judgmental hand of God, we can see places in our country where America and Americans are still blessed when those groups of people decide to do what's right in their own communities and areas. Let's make that true of our own city, our own county, our own state even, and go against the flow of lawlessness in these days. God bless you. I'll see you again right here next week as we wake up in the Word, and tomorrow, hopefully, everyone can worship freely and openly wherever you are. Hopefully, you'll be worshiping the Lord with some group of believers tomorrow and praising his name and keeping Jesus as Lord on the throne. We'll see you again. God bless you.